Hello, rock and roll rebels, and welcome to another episode of Ramble On with Rosie. It is still December, so we are still discussing the one and only great Mr. Paul Rodgers, who just had his birthday a couple of days ago on December 17th. So, to continue the dialogue in December about Mr. Paul Rodgers, we will dissect some of his collaborations with other artists. Specifically a collaboration he did with Bill Wyman of the Rolling Stones, and then also a album Paul Rodgers did in which a bunch of other artists come and collaborate with him. So, starting with the Bill Wyman project, it was called Willie and the Poor Boys, and it sort of sprang out of the Arms tour, and the Arms tour Arms was a acronym, and it was something research multiple sclerosis. Basically, Ronnie Lane of the Small Faces had multiple sclerosis. I hope I'm pronouncing that even remotely correctly. And so they put on this tour to benefit for research for the disease, as well as to pay for treatments for Ronnie Lane. And this tour for Arms had a who's who. It was Steve Winwood, Eric Clapton, Jimmy Page, Jeff Beck, did I say Steve Winwood already? Joe Cocker, Kenny Jones, and Paul Rodgers. And after that tour that they did, Bill Wyman had this Willie and the Poor Boys project, which was essentially he and I believe Charlie Watts was the other consistent member, so the rhythm section of the Rolling Stones, and the other vocalists and guitar players would sort of rotate in, and it'd be a variety of artists. I don't have time to go into it because the Willie and the Poor Boys album could be a Ramble episode in of itself. But needless to say, many acts came in, did a couple songs with Willie and the Poor Boys, and that was their little project with Bill Wyman. The one we're specifically talking about is going to be the two songs that Paul Rodgers did for the Willie and the Poor Boys album, which would be These Arms of Mine, which was an Otis Redding song, and Paul does it beautifully. Like, I cannot emphasize enough how just smooth and charming and just delightful the Paul Rodgers version of These Arms of Mine is. There's actually a video, like a music video kind of video, that they made for the song, and it's on YouTube. I'll try to put it into a playlist sometime soon, along with other songs I'll be referencing in this week and next week's episode. But the video is well worth watching. You get to see Charlie Watts as well as Bill, and Ronnie Lane is in it too. So you get 3 Stones members. And did I say Ronnie Lane? I meant Ronnie Wood. It gets confusing when there's like 2 Ronnies who were in the Faces and, somewhat associated with similar acts. But Ronnie Wood is in the video, as are Mr. Paul Rodgers singing lead, and one Jimmy Page on guitar. Now, this is happening before The Firm, which is the group with Jimmy Page and Paul Rodgers, has went on tour. So they're rehearsing for the tour, and then they come over and help, or, do 2 songs for the Bill Wyman's Willie and the Poor Boys album. The second song that they do together, both of them on this one as well as These Arms of Mine, is Slippin' and Slidin', which was the B-side originally to Little Richard's Long Tall Sally. And it's a really fast-paced, fun, dance your butt off kind of song. So, in addition to that, it was also covered by Otis Redding, which, if you've listened to Paul Rodgers talk about his influences, Otis Redding was a very big influence for Paul Rodgers. He was, sort of what he aspired to be as a vocalist. So, Otis Redding's going to come up a lot, both in this week's episode and especially in next week's episode, if I end up doing one on the Royal Sessions album, which is my plan. So, fast forward 10 years after this Willie and the Poor Boys project that he and Jimmy Page do, and it's the mid-90s now, and Paul Rodgers is doing a homage to the late and, at the point, I believe fairly recently deceased Muddy Waters. The album is called Muddy Water Blues, and Paul Rodgers even composes a new song for this album, titled Muddy Water Blues, that he writes, and it's a really deep groove. It actually is the song that kicks off the album, and features twice on the album, both as a acoustic and electric blues song. And so this, some info on this song, on this album, is that in addition to having a rotating door of various guitarists come in and play blues on this homage album to Muddy Waters, it also has the Son of Thunder. Not the Sons of Thunder, those are in the Bible. The Son of Thunder, as in Jason Bonham, the son of John Bonham, is the primary drum player. In fact, I believe the only drummer on the album. And as I mentioned, it features a variety of guitar players. Paul Rodgers literally made a list, and he was able to get all but 3 of the people on the list. The 3 he was unable to get were Santana, Billy Gibbons of ZZ Top, and Jimmy Page, all of whom were busy with other engagements, otherwise they would have joined. And it's fun as you listen to this album to speculate maybe which songs they would have had which of those 3 do had they been available. So, to launch into the album Muddy Water Blues, as I mentioned, it kicks off with the song Muddy Water Blues that Paul Rodgers wrote in tribute to Muddy Waters. And it's a slow groove acoustic version featuring Buddy Guy on guitar, playing the acoustic blues. And it's a real, just enjoyable track. The next side note here is that the way they got Buddy Guy to come is there was an agreement between them that if Buddy came and played on Paul's album, then Paul would go and sing on Buddy's album. And so you can look it up, and there's a charming version of Some Kind of Wonderful on Buddy Guy's album in which Paul Rodgers sings. So it's a different take on a song that most people know by Grand Funk Railroad. And the Buddy Guy version with Paul Rodgers on vocals is really enjoyable and different, but still very fun and upbeat. So worth checking out to be sure. Now, moving on to the next track, which is Louisiana Blues, which I really enjoy. I'm not just saying that because I'm literally headed to Louisiana next week to see my relatives. It's a really good song. It just blues. I mean, all these songs obviously are going to be blues because they're all covers of Muddy Waters songs. This particular track has a lesser known guitarist on it that features on a couple songs in this album. His name is Trevor Rabin. He's from South Africa and was in a band called Rabbit, but he has played with everybody from Yes to Mr. Mister to Manfred Mann's Earth Band, and even Michael Jackson on his They Don't Care About Us track. He's also done the score for quite a few films, especially from the 90s and early 2000s. So things like Remember the Titans, which I happen to love the soundtrack to, not just the classic rock songs they used, but also the actual score itself. So he did Remember the Titans, and Gone in 60 Seconds, and Glory Road, and Armageddon. And funnily enough, he did the score to the 2002 movie Bad Company. So, that's a bit in the future. He was working with Paul Rodgers of Bad Company long before he did the soundtrack to a movie of the same name. It's really good guitar work, though. Now, another favorite of mine is the third track, which is I Can't Be Satisfied, which features some really kind of elaborate, almost, guitar intro by Brian Setzer of the Stray Cats, which you would not expect. I mean, I don't want to call them a one-hit wonder, but other than Stray Cat Strut, you don't really hear a lot by the Stray Cats. You don't really expect this kind of epic guitar work by someone from, a band that doesn't really dig into the blues sound that much, punk rockabilly a little bit kind of thing. So, I enjoy this. I want to go dig into Setzer's career more and after listening to his work on this particular track because it's really good. Both the really cool finger picking kind of intro and the actual guitar work throughout the song are all top notch. Now, the next song is Rolling Stone, the inspiration for the name of the band, amongst other things. And it is it's got Jeff Beck on it, and it's a really good version of the song. Obviously, Jeff Beck needs no introduction and has done a incredible job on guitar. It's I mean, how do you even describe Jeff Beck's guitar work? Everybody knows what it is, and if they do know what it is, they know that it is almost undescribable. He's a league of his own and a category of his own. In fact, there's an interview with Paul Rodgers talking about this album and basically saying that about Jeff, that especially as far as his technical ability on guitar goes, he is kind of in this own class of his by himself. So, he of course holds up to that in this song. Um, there's also a really good version of this song on the Paul Rodgers double album Now and Live, and it's a live version of this song that is volcano level hot blistering blues. It's so good. I love that live version even more than this album version, and I can't even think of who was on guitar when Paul Rodgers did it live. The other fun thing about the song, like I mentioned earlier, I like to think about which guitarist would have ended up on which track. And given Jeff Beck features on 3 songs on this album, I'd like to think that maybe Paul Rodgers had intended Jimmy Page to be playing on Rolling Stone because it kind of fit. It would have been a really cool song to hear Jimmy do and would have fit into his style of playing very well, I would think. Now, the next song actually features on the album twice. It is Good Morning Little Schoolgirl, which has been covered all over the place. But in this case, yet again, it's Jeff Beck um, playing guitar on the track. And when it comes to theorizing who might have done what song out of the guitarists that weren't able to participate in this project, I'd like to think that maybe this song had been intended for Billy Gibbons. I think he'd have done a really knockout job of it. It's a little bit not softer, because none of these songs are really soft other than the one that features David Gilmour maybe, and we'll get to that. But this, they're not soft, but this is a little bit more mellow than the other 2 tracks that have Jeff Beck on them. So it wouldn't have been mellow if Billy Gibbons had done it, but I think the rhythm of this song would have really complemented well with Billy Gibbons' very signature style of guitar playing. The other fun things about Good Morning Little Schoolgirl is, like I mentioned, it's been covered by so many artists. Everybody from Jeff Beck's former group, the Yardbirds, to Jeff Beck's former band member, of the Jeff Beck group, Rod Stewart, and then you've got the 10 Years After version, which is fairly well known, and everybody from Johnny Winter to the Grateful Dead has done this song. So, it's The Good Morning Little Schoolgirl has been covered a lot. I think, if I remember correctly, I looked it up and there's like over 100 versions of this song out there. It's one of the songs on this album's got over 100 covers. It may not be this one, but Good Morning Little Schoolgirl has certainly been covered a multitude of times. Now getting on to the next track, which is I'm Your Hoochie Coochie Man, and it has Steve Miller of the Steve Miller Band playing guitar on it. So there's quite a variety of guitar players on here. Like I said, it's everything from Brian Setzer of the Stray Cats to Jeff Beck and now Steve Miller. You know, you wouldn't normally think of all these artists coming together, but it says something for the power of the voice, aka Paul Rodgers, in that he's got enough clout to bring in just about every guitarist that he, wanted, other than the ones that were busy because of scheduling, difficulties, where they couldn't coordinate. So, I'm Your Hoochie Coochie Man has been covered even more than Good Morning Little Squirrel Girl. There are at least 150 versions of this song. Everybody from Dion to The Doors and Motorhead to Southside Johnny. And that's a pretty big range that we just went through there. Like, I was surprised to hear that Motorhead had covered this song, but I wasn't that surprised, because everybody's covered this song, clearly, with over 150 versions of it in existence out there. And this version can definitely hold up against some of, the best of the others. Paul Rodgers' voice cannot be described and cannot be praised enough. Like, every time I listen to any of his work, I'm like, how is he able to sing like this? It's just so good. It's so bluesy, and it has the raw depth that you need to sing the blues, but it's also still kind of smooth in a way, and there's a lot of, like, pure power to it, where it's not like, I mean, clearly he's been singing since he was, like, 17, and that's just in bands that had recording contracts, and he's still maintained his voice to this day, which says something about, like, the control and mastery he has over his voice, rather than the people who just belt it out from the gut without any real control and end up shredding their vocal cords. So, Paul's voice is still intact. The most recent thing I heard him sing, he still sounds, like he's maybe in his 40s. So his voice has aged well, and so has he. And this album has also aged well, because it's just a joy to listen to and to be reminded of the marvelous contributions of Muddy Waters. But to get back to the songs on this album, the next one is one of my favorites off of this album. It's called She's Alright, and it's got Trevor Rabin again, who's really an impressive guitar player. In addition to, like, all those movie soundtracks he did the score to, and all the other, playing with Yes and other stuff, he's just a really good guitar player on this album, and I believe he also helped produce it or arrange it. So he's very talented individual, even though he never gets talked about. And Paul's voice is just excellent, of course, and it's a really fun, fast-paced, sort of punchy song, and I enjoy it. There's also some Hammond organ on it, which is done by Ronnie Foster. I think he did some Hammond on some other tracks on this album too, but this one particular I know he did. And Ronnie Foster he's sort of a session player, but sort of not. He's played on albums by everybody from Chet Atkins to Stevie Wonder and George Benson to the Jacksons. So another talented, unsung and individual, much like Trevor Rabin, who is playing guitar on this particular track. The next track is Standing Around Crying, which is the one I referenced before, because it has the insanely talented David Gilmour on it. And it's like the slowest song on this album. And it's really, being not a huge fan of slow things, I didn't maybe initially appreciate it, but now that I've listened to it and been in the mood to appreciate it, Standing Around Crying is a gorgeous, deep, bluesy song, and I really enjoy it these days. I mean, David Gilmour's guitar skills are pretty much incontestable, and he does marvelously here. It's also interesting to kind of hear him fully embracing the blues rather than, how you typically hear him when he's in Pink Floyd and he's over in his, prog rock kind of style. He's really in the blues here, and it's beautiful to listen to. I love it. It's really kind of clean sound to the song. It's not the heavily distorted, electrified blues sound that I love and enjoy, hence probably why this song didn't first appeal to me, but listening to it without prejudiced ears, you can't deny the just sheer talent that David Gilmour possesses and showcases excellently on this song. And the track after this, we go from the prog rock legend on guitar to the young gunner Slash on guitar. And bear in mind, this is like the mid 90s, so I don't think he's done Velvet Revolver yet, and not quite sure if he has. It's been fairly recently, because it's like 94, and I'm trying to remember exactly when Slash made his exit from Guns. But anyways, it's good. It's not as good as some of the other tracks. It's just, I don't know the particular reason why. It just doesn't stand up. Maybe because some of the other tracks are so exemplarily good, because they're doing The Hunter, the classic Free song, like I mentioned in last week's episode, that they couldn't successfully remove from their live shows because everybody loved them doing it so much. Apparently, old habits die hard, and Paul Rodgers couldn't leave this song alone, and when he's doing a tribute to Muddy Waters, he had to do this song, which is understandable. And he, of course, does good, but it doesn't quite pack the vitality and depth that some of the other songs on this album do. So, The Hunter is good, but it's not as good as the rest of the album, put it that way. Now, following The Hunter is She Moves Me, which is just, it's slower too. It's got that sort of churning pacing that some blues songs do, where it almost feels like you're on the muddy Mississippi going down the river. Like the rhythm is almost the thump of a paddle on a boat. It's just a really evocative groove on this song. And the guitar work on this one is done by Gary Moore, who, yet again, not talked about much, but he was in Skid Row and in Thin Lizzy. So, he's been around. You've heard him. You just don't know that you've heard him unless you're really into music. Because, I mean, I've heard him, but I didn't know I'd heard him until I looked into what all he'd done. And, so after She Moves Me comes I'm Ready, which features future collaborative bandmate Brian May of Queen. This predates Paul Rodgers' invitation to front Queen by, I think, about 5 years, maybe a little less than that, but he has not, taken the microphone to front Queen in Queen plus Paul Rodgers yet. Which, side note, he would be the first singer to replace is not the word, because replace is not something anybody could do for Freddie Mercury, and Brian May and Roger Taylor of Queen specifically said, like, no one can or will replace Freddie. We just have someone singing our songs. And the Queen plus Paul Rodgers project may be something I discuss in future, but for now, suffice to say that Brian May and Paul Rodgers must have been getting along fairly well, because this project with Brian May playing on I'm Ready turned out really well, and Brian and him got along well enough to get together again later down the road. Which, side note about the songs on this album, about half the guitar players were actually able to come to the same studio where Paul was and, record together, and the other half, sent in their tracks um, to, be mixed in with Paul's vocals and stuff. So that was kind of interesting. I'm trying to remember who all was and wasn't there. I know one particular artist showed up, and we'll get to that one in a minute. But getting to the next track is another widely covered song of I Just Want to Make Love to You, which this one has Jeff Beck on it again. And there's also over 100 covers of this song as well. So much like Hoochie Coochie Man earlier. Most people, I think, probably know the Etta James version of this song. I think it's the most widely played. But there is also the Foghat version, and this version, it's so good. Like, of the 3 tracks with Jeff Beck on it, this to me by far is the best, and the other 2 are nothing to be sneezed at. But Jeff's guitar work is so dang sultry and groovy and hot, I think it could peel paint off the walls. Like, never mind the subject matter of the song. Even disregard Paul's amazing gritty bluesy vocals. Just Jeff's guitar work alone on this song is just scorching. It's so good. It sets the mood, which is the mood of I just want to make love to you, without even any lyrical content, needed to be added. It's a really, 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 really good guitar work on this song. Like, I can't express it enough. And Jeff outdoes himself on this song, and it's probably, if not my favorite song on the whole album, and probably my favorite version of this decently widely covered song. Now, the 13th track on this album, I wonder if they planned this, because 13's an unlucky number, is Born Under a Bad Sign, which, of course, has been covered by Cream, and I believe was originally done by Albert King. But anyways, Born Under a Bad Sign features Neil Schon of Journey, and it's a song that Paul Rodgers will visit again on his Royal Sessions album, which will probably be the topic of next week's episode. Just a little spoiler there for y'all. And you'll also get a little bit more on this episode about collaborations with Neil Schon, but in a minute, because we're going to talk about my other contender for favorite song on this album, which would be the second version of Good Morning Little Schoolgirl. This one, however, does not feature Jeff Beck. It features Richie Sambora of Bon Jovi. Yeah, not your first pick to pick somebody playing a blues song and playing it well, but this version just rocks. I love this version of Good Morning Little Schoolgirl. It may be my favorite version, not just on this album, but overall of all existing versions of Good Morning Little Schoolgirl, and that's including Rod Stewart and 10 Years After. It's really, really good, and Sambora is one of the guitarists who was able to come in and record with Paul Rodgers, rather than the people who just sent in their tracks. In fact, Sambora flew in just to record. Tells you something about the magnetic powers of Paul Rodgers and his legendary status, and this is, like 25 years ago, almost 30. So he's a living legend and has been one for quite some time. And so that's the 14th track was Good Morning Little Schoolgirl with Richie Sambora. And the final track is Muddy Water Blues with Neil Schon again. And this version of Muddy Water Blues is electric. And the Neil Schon guitar work on here is really good. In fact, Neil Schon And Paul Rodgers would get together again a couple years later for a live EP. I believe it was just titled the Jimi Hendrix Set. It was part of, I believe, a tour in tribute to Jimi Hendrix. Which, fun fact about Paul Rodgers and Jimi Hendrix is that when discussing Hendrix, I believe it's the intro to a live version of Little Wing that he did, not for this project he did with Neil Schon, but I think it's on the Now and Live CD that I mentioned the good version of Rolling Stone being on as well. He discusses his admiration for Jimi Hendrix as a songwriter, which I find very unique, because obviously Hendrix's guitar playing gets discussed all the time, pretty much in any conversation about guitar players, because it's, the level of player he was is almost inimitable. But people don't often discuss Hendrix as a songwriter. And he was a really good songwriter. I mean, you think about songs like Little Wing and Angel and even Foxy Lady, and they're really good songs. And so I appreciate Paul Rodgers for sort of making me consider Hendrix's songwriting abilities more than I would normally do, because normally I'm lost in the guitar work and I'm like, oh, yeah, there's really good song here too, really good lyrics and poetry to them. Little Wing is very poetic. But so to this Jimi Hendrix set that he did with Neil Schon, Paul's vocals cannot be praised enough, and yet again I could go on with all sorts of superlatives about how good they were on this Jimi Hendrix set that he did live with Neil Schon. I really wish I could say the same about Neil's guitar work. However, he falls into what I was mentioning earlier, where Hendrix is almost inimitable. And I get that some people are like, well, I can't play like Hendrix, so I'm gonna play it this other style, which sometimes you can pull off. Like artists like Stevie Ray Vaughan have pulled off playing Hendrix in their own style. But for lack of better words, Neil Schon plays the Hendrix songs like he's trying to play like Eddie Van Halen trying to play Hendrix. Like it's way too much, razzle dazzle, sort of not metal, but that fast, sort of flashy sound rather than getting into the groove. And so the guitar work is kind of disappointing on that live set. However, you know, Paul Rodgers could sing with no accompaniment whatsoever of any instrument and still knock your socks off. So it's worth checking out at least a little bit there. Of course, if you want to hear Paul Rodgers do at least one Hendrix song, you can listen to him do Little Wing. And I'm pretty sure it's on the Now and Live album. If not, it's on one of Paul Rodgers' other solo live albums, and it's very well done. And speaking of done, we are done with this episode for this week. Like I said, next week's will probably be about his Royal Sessions project. I was gonna try and squeeze that one into here, but it needs an episode of its own, because there's so much that went on with the Royal Sessions album. And I'm also in search of trying to find a place, because Spotify and YouTube both pulled it, and I'm trying to find it before I do an episode on it. So if anybody comes across a good public domain internet, kind of place to listen to this song, listen to the Royal Sessions album, let me know, because it's making things frustrating, because I would love for y'all to be able to look up and listen what I'm talking about. So hopefully I can solve that problem before next week. In the meantime, have a great week, be kind to each other, and keep on rocking on, and we'll talk to you next week.